Food stories. We all have them. And yet, how often do we actually think about food and how that impacts our day to day life? Whether you like the food you eat or you feel guilty all the time, it's interesting when you think about how your thought pattern around food is such a huge part of how you feel about yourself, how you show up, how you relate to others. And in this interview, Elise Museles talks to us about food story, what it means. We unpack that story. We talk about food noise, all the noise that's out there, and how you feel about your food really impacts so many different areas of your life. Her book, her best-selling book, Food Story, is out. Go get it. I love this book. It also has some beautiful recipes that we talk about and some really great exercises to help you work through a story that you might have been carrying around for way too long that does not serve you anymore. Get ready for a really inspiring and insightful interview with the amazing Elise Museles. Elise, welcome to the show. It is so wonderful to see you again.
It is so good to see you, Keri.
You
You
know what
always
I
have
love?
the best energy.
Oh, thank you so much. I felt the same way when I met you in person at your book launch. And I was just, it was so interesting, Elise, because we all have a food story, but I don't think many of us think about it. And when you started sharing your story and what brought about this book and all the things you took us through, I was really excited to bring you to my community because our food impacts our health, impacts our attitude, impacts how we feel about ourselves. So take us back for a minute, Elise. Share a little bit about your background and how you came up with the concept of the book Food Story.
Okay, sure. And I'll give you an abbreviated version so we can get to, because my food story is long and there are a lot of twists and turns, but I grew up in LA where you are now. So that says a lot about,
And we're done with the interview. Yeah.
I was just about to say, so can I go now? No, not that I feel that way. But it just, I grew up in LA and also with a mom who is very conscientious, and her friends, like they used to bring their salad dressing to dinner, so that's a whole nother story. So, I just, I toggled between being very health conscious and obsessive.
Mhm.
And, just from a very young age, when I was 9 years old, I was put on my first diet. And it's interesting because so many people I've worked with and talked to have had similar experiences, and you don't realize how that impacts you all the way into your adulthood,
Yeah.
until you reflect on it. And so what happened is I went to the doctor's office and I had been begging to get my ears pierced. And back then the doctor would pierce your ears. And he said, if you lose 5 pounds, and I was never like, you wouldn't see it as a health issue. I was just like a growing kid who might have like been prepubescent or something. You know how
Sure.
that happens.
Yes.
And so I went on my first diet, because I wanted to get my ears pierced, and I learned this
Oh, at
message
9.
at 9. And at the same time, my dad was trying to control his sleep eating. He would wake up in the morning and feel terrible about himself because he was unaware of the fact that he would get up and literally walk downstairs, raid the fridge, and go back to sleep. And so it had nothing to do with all of us, but he ended up, as a control, he locked the fridge literally a padlock every single night. And he'd
Wow.
call up and, so my brother, sister, and I, he'd say, do you want anything before I lock up? We learned that food was something you can control and it was best kept under lock and key. And so, it just, that stuck with me as a theme, and all the way into
Yeah.
adulthood. And, I'm just sharing with you a couple pivotal moments, but I really struggled with what I now call eating perfectionism, where I just was constantly on the hunt for the perfect diet, eating the perfect food. And that led to learning a lot, right? Learning a lot about health and how foods affect you. But it was under the guise of back then being skinny instead of just healthy. And it
Yep.
just was not a great mindset. So I went on to law school, and my boyfriend at the time and I were really serious. We went to this restaurant, and it was French, and none of the foods were permitted on my plan, and so I would, was happy to be there with him, but I didn't care for the food. And so I did the move it around with a fork, and the head chef came out and was like, is something wrong? Nobody comes here and doesn't eat. And it was such a, like, it just, my then boyfriend was so visibly uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable. And it was just such a wake up call, because I realized, like, this conversation that I had for years and years and years in my own head didn't just exist in my head, it was affecting other people.
Yeah.
And so often, so many of us have stress about food and we think it's our own issue, but we're around our kids and they pick up on all those signals, or, whoever we're dining with or living with, our roommates, and we all affect one another's food story. And of course, I didn't have that language back then because I was immersed in, law school and starting my legal career, but I knew something was wrong. And so I continued to be passionate. I'm going to fast forward. I had kids, and, I did heal. It's not linear and it's a journey, and I did
Yeah.
heal, but I ended up, leaving the law, and that's a whole nother
A whole
episode.
other book. Yes.
Yeah. And pursuing a career, the one I have right now, in health and wellness. And when I first started, I was really, really fixated on what is on our plate. And so many of us are like, what should I eat? What should I eat to feel better? And we think about, how many vegetables, or, what we shouldn't eat, and all these rules or whatever. But what was such another wake up call, a pivotal moment for me, was when I realized how impactful our thoughts were on this whole process of
Yes.
digesting our food, metabolizing our food, let alone enjoying our food. And that's when I got certified in eating psychology. And I knew that I had to heal my own mindset around food, and that when I got all those tools, I could help all the clients who were sophisticated, savvy, and like knew so much that they could write their own blog, but there was something getting in the way of them feeling at peace around food.
Yeah.
And then, so to go to the concept of food story, I was talking to all these clients, like, tell me about your relationship with food. And they would just like cringe, or say, oh, it's complicated. And so I tried to figure out, how can I talk about this that felt more inviting? So it wasn't just like you and food. And that's where food story comes in, because it really helps you realize that there's different chapters, that there's heroes, there's villains, diet culture, that there's,
Yes.
right, that there's
Yeah.
so many messages. I call that food noise. And that when you think of it as a story, it makes you realize that it's not just you and food, that so much impacts the way you relate to food.
Hmm.
And then when I start talking to people about their food story, they'd say, oh, I didn't even realize I had a food story. And they'd start thinking back, oh, so that's why I do what I do, or that's why
Yeah.
I think how I think, or yeah, I remember when I was growing up, this happened or that happened. And they can piece all the, different components together and understand, why they are the way they are around food. So
Yeah,
that
you
was
know what, Elise?
long-winded.
I just want to interrupt you for a second because I think it's really important to go back to, so many of us don't even realize that we have a food story and what maybe someone said or what we heard or how our parents, grew up around food. I mean, I love my mom to death, but to this day, she's quite the yo-yo dieter. So as a young person, I was always looking at that. And then growing up in entertainment, even though I wasn't in LA at the time, I was in Oregon. I just remember hearing my whole life, if you lost 10 pounds, I remember my grandfather saying, models don't eat like that. And I'm like, I don't know what I was eating at the time, but those things and
Yeah,
going and listening to you at your book launch, it really brought it home to me because we don't realize how those things that you say, and I'm saying this to all the mamas out there right now, because I have a
right.
little girl
Yeah.
who is going to be 7. And I'm very aware of what I say about food, how I talk about food, how I talk about my body in front of her, because I think it does make such an impact on their little lives and their grown up lives as well. So I just want to take a moment because someone right now needs to hear that, hey, the good thing about a story is that you get the opportunity to rewrite it as well, that you can choose a different story. You can create the chapters, but you can't do it until you know what story you're carrying around with you.
Exactly. Do you feel like that once you became aware, having a daughter, and this goes for any child, any, a son or daughter, but just that you changed the way you talk to yourself and you thought about yourself because you wanted to pass on that healthier narrative and interactions that you have with yourself when you're looking in the mirror, when you're
Yeah,
eating
I think
food.
so. I'm definitely more mindful of it. And, I have to admit the food story still comes up, but because I'm so aware of it, and I feel like I work really hard to have a pretty balanced and healthy lifestyle, I am more aware. And then I have to really consciously choose whether it's self-talk or in front of my daughter, like, be careful what you say. Be careful what you say, either to yourself or out loud to your kids. And like you said, your spouses too. If every time you go out to eat, you're like, honey, I need to bring my salad dressing. And no offense for those of you that are on that sort of regimen, but
Yeah.
it's like where that need to control shows up in the rest of your life. It's just something to think about. It's something to be mindful of, because to me, mindfulness is like the greatest opening to opportunity.
hmm Yeah, the first step is really that awareness because, like you said, so many people will respond, well, I don't have a food story. And I want to bring in that food story as a combination of everything. So there are, of course, some of the negative, habits or mindsets that we have, that have been passed on to us or that we've, absorbed through the media or whatever. But there's also the positive parts too. And
Mhm.
I want people to remember that and to think about that too, because so many, when you start asking, like I've had a lot of guests on my podcast talk about their grandparents. A lot of people have really positive associations with food from their grandparents or from family gatherings. And it's not about whether a certain dish is healthy or not. It's a different
Yeah.
kind of nourishment. And
I
so
come from an Italian family. We're all about good food.
what's
you
it,
know?
what's like a quintessential dish that represents your family?
Oh, my mom's homemade lasagna. Any of her sauce is incredible. And I have to say, too, she makes the most amazing spaghetti and clams. And when I go to her house, I have to be like, you know what, Keri? Enjoy this food. Enjoy this home cooked meal from mama, because the other half of my brain is, Keri, that's way too many carbs. You don't need to eat that much. But talking about enjoying the food, I think is a huge part of your food story. Because if you're going to eat something and just feel guilty about it after, isn't that for like food psychology, like neuroses? Like how do you enjoy anything if you always feel like you're bad or you're making a bad decision? Can we talk about that for a minute? Because I
Oh,
do feel like
yes.
we categorize food as good and bad, and then we guilt the hell out of ourselves if we eat something bad. So let's talk about that psychology and how do we work through that?
Well, okay, so let's use your example of the lasagna because I think it's really good. When you eat that lasagna, you're feeling like the love, the different
I'm
generations of
in a
your,
little bit of heaven. Yeah.
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 And so, like, you have to think that there's different kinds of nourishment. That's like soul nourishment, right? And if you're going to feel guilty about it, it sort of defeats the whole purpose of it because then you ate it and you didn't really enjoy it, and
Right.
so one of
Yeah.
the other things that was really so like pivotal for me was learning the physiology behind the stress that we have and that includes stressful thoughts about food. And so in a nutshell, without going deep into the science, is that when you are having stressful thoughts, whether they're true or not, so that could be like, am I going to be bloated? Am I going to have a stomach ache? Am I going to regret this later? So all of the thoughts that go along with guilt, that actually help, like you have a whole cascade of hormones that are released and your body is affected by it. So you have your spike in cortisol, because you're
Mhm.
stressing out, and it affects your metabolism. It doesn't work as efficiently. You don't assimilate as many nutrients, and your digestion shuts down because it's your body is
Because
thinking
of
this,
the thought, not because of the food you ate.
right, because of the
Yes.
thought.
Yes.
And when I learned about that, I mean, when you think about my eating perfectionism, it was all about what was going on inside my head. So it was not so much about, I mean, I was eating all the kale, quinoa, whatever, green smoothies. It didn't matter. I was still like, am I being a good example for my community? Is this really, healthy, or am I having too much of this? It doesn't matter what you're eating.
Mhm.
Your body will respond that way with this stressful thought.
All
So
right,
that,
ladies, are you listening? And my
yeah,
gentlemen too, but come on. She's talking about you can be eating kale, but if you have stressful thoughts around your kale, it's not going to serve your body as well as it could. That's amazing.
It is really amazing, but the flip side of it is that when you can take a few deep breaths, come back into your body and say what you said, this is a slice of heaven and I'm enjoying this meal. And I want my daughter to be able to have her grandmother's, spaghetti or whatever it is with the awesome sauce and not even think about guilt. That when you can like physically, I'm going to take a few deep breaths, get rid of that stress. Your body goes into relaxation mode, which is the ideal state to, it's rest and digest. It's the ideal state to absorb the nutrients and to metabolize your meal more efficiently. So you want to come to the table relaxed. That's the ultimate goal. And I know we have stresses in our lives, especially, over the last few years, and it's just a fact of modern day living. But the guilt and the stressful thoughts about food are not. That's what's, in our control. And of course, we've been influenced by the media or social media or whatever it is. That I'm not putting blame on it. But once we start to realize, okay, I don't have to, like intermittent fast, for example. I'm just going to bring that up because a lot of people feel like they have to follow those certain rules. Well, maybe it's not for you. So like the solution is to do things so you're reconnected back to your body.
Yeah.
When you do that, you will not feel as guilty because you'll be so connected. Like, I need this right now, or I want this right now. And, it's going to feel really good. And then I just get back to the other things that make me feel good. Run in the morning or all the things you
Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
all the water. And then it's just like, it's another meal and it's no big deal, but it made you feel like filled your soul up.
Yeah. And that's sometimes just as important as what you put on your plate, right? How you feel in the moment, who you're with. You're talking about loving your food. You took us through this really awesome chocolate meditation. Can you share a little bit about that?
Of course. And I'm so glad that you experienced it because you really have to experience to understand the full value of it. But the chocolate meditation is it's an exaggerated exercise where you grab a piece of chocolate and you bring all your senses to the table and you eat it slowly and you notice all the nuances and you shut your, thoughts down, and all you're doing is being there and present with your chocolate. So it's super exaggerated. It's not realistic to think that every meal is going to be, like
I
we're
think
going to
about
sit
like
at
the
a
commercial where it's like this over exaggerated bite of chocolate. But I will say, like, that's how I felt when I was doing it.
But I think that what it really illustrates is that we're not present with our food. Even when we think we are, we've got our phone out or we're multitasking or our mind is going to the next thought. And it could even be, I want another bite of chocolate, or it could be the to-do list, or it could be paying attention to the noise in the next room or your kids fighting or whatever. And
Mhm.
so it just shows you that when you do bring your senses to the table, and maybe not in that really super exaggerated way, you enjoy your food so much more. And you're also, connected to your body and knowing like, this tastes good. I'm super satisfied right now. Or, wow, I thought I used to love whatever it is that you're eating, a sandwich. And I actually don't feel good when I eat it, but we don't know if we're not paying attention and we're multitasking and we're doing other things. I have this expression, and it's come up a lot on the different like interviews I've done recently, and that is that we don't just eat, we eat. And so we eat and run out the door, we make a smoothie and drive carpool, we eat and get on our phones, we eat and answer emails, we eat and watch TV, we eat and
Yeah.
whatever, like, right, we eat. And so I would like to propose that as much as the time as possible, we just eat. And that could be eating with other people and enjoying their company, but you're all around connecting over a meal. It's a lot different than, putting half your energy or even more to something else that's external outside of you.
Yeah. I mean, I really resonate with that. I love my husband so much, but when we sit down for dinner, I'm like, did you breathe at all during that meal? I mean, he's like the fastest eater on the planet.
Mine too.
And I find myself then eating faster, or, you finally have a break from work and you go out into the kitchen and then you're answering emails, you're cleaning, like you're doing all these things. Then before you know it, you don't even think about what you ate. And I have to give it to you, Elise, because since reading your book and getting to know you, I am more mindful.
I
I
love that.
am thinking about, what am I eating? Do I enjoy what I'm eating? Taking a moment instead of just scarfing it all down and then out you go. Because that's also a way to like manage, I think, at least for me, like manage my weight and my fitness is, you know what, when you mindfully eat, you enjoy it so much and you can say, I'm satisfied. That was amazing. But when you're eating and it's so
Right.
much easier to consume more because you're not even thinking about the food you're eating. You're just doing. And as we do life, the level of consciousness, I think, in which we do the things, it's all experiential, you know? And I just love
Yeah.
this conversation because I really think food, especially for my female entrepreneurs out there, and impacts us in such incredible, deep ways that unless we take time to look at them and maybe recreate the story, it can be that thing, that mindset, that garbage, right? That trash talk that we're carrying around with us. And it does. It impacts our kids, it impacts our relationships, it impacts our productivity, how we feel about ourselves, our
Yeah.
confidence, and all of that impacts everything else in our life.
Right. And also it's the thing that like maybe other, it's the conversation, the narrative you're having with yourself. So a lot of your entrepreneurs on the outside look they are successful, not that they look successful, but they have
Mhm.
everything together. And so then it's like the one thing that gnaws, like, oh, why can't I
Yeah.
get this
Yeah.
straight? And it's not something that we collectively feel comfortable discussing with one another. I'm hoping, I think now people are so much more vulnerable and they share their stories and it's different than it was 10 years
But
ago.
even then, let's be honest. I mean, well, where we are, and in most places, it is about like what you're eating or what diet you're on. Or are you intermittent fasting? So I feel
Yeah,
like when we talk about food, it is still around culture and what we
labels,
hear, right? Versus how we feel about
which is
food.
the
It's a
big
very different
question.
conversation.
Yeah, and also speaking of how we feel, that's something that I really encourage people to ask themselves, like, how do I want to feel? And to
Mm.
use food in a way that can help promote whatever that feeling is. So there are certain meals that might make you feel comforted, for example, or soothed, or, that they give you energy.
I was say
So
energized came up for me.
it
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
did.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so, and even beyond that, you can learn about specific nutrients, which is probably a whole nother conversation. But like, for example, foods that are high in magnesium, which is considered the anti-stress mineral, will help you feel more relaxed. And so there, you can use food in a way, instead of thinking of what food will do to you, which was the conversation we had earlier about the guilt and will I feel bloated? Will I gain weight? Will I, feel tired after the meal? Think about everything it can do for you. It's like a little
Yes.
tiny flip of the script, but it's
Mhm.
so empowering. And it also makes food more of your friend, which a lot of us aren't in that place yet where we
Yeah.
think of food as our friend. We fear it. We're worried about, am I having too much or too many of what you said before, the bad foods? And think about the food that's your friend, that gives you
Mhm.
energy, that allows you to be the entrepreneur that you are and to do all the things and to go for your walks and, play with your kids, and all of that is because of the nourishment you give yourself.
Yes. Oh, it's so good. Let's talk about, and we did talk about it a little bit about the food noise. Like
Oh,
how do
okay.
we work through the food noise?
I think that's my favorite conversation right now because there's so much of it.
There's so much.
And
Yes.
here's the thing about food noise that I've really come to realize: when you're most vulnerable, it's the loudest. So
Ooh.
after,
Listen up.
yeah,
When you're most vulnerable, it's the loudest. Isn't that the
right?
truth? Yeah.
And that's just something that I've thought about recently as things started to open up and we get back to our new kind of normal. And people, might not feel as comfortable. Like, it was a few years before really, really socialized. And I mean, this can exist anytime. It's not just right now. But what makes it so
Right.
pertinent now is I think a lot of people changed their relationship with food or had a different chapter in their food story over the last few years. How could you
Yeah.
not? I mean,
Yeah. I
life
mean,
was
I heard so many people have said, the pandemic 15, we've all gained weight because we were at home. We weren't
And
moving as much.
stress.
Stress. Yes. Just a
Right.
little bit, right? Just a
Right.
little stress.
Yeah. And so I think that, like, the messages we hear when we're feeling that way are really loud. So the first step, so food noise is all the messages that you hear from media, you see on social media. It can be even like the books that you still have in your house that like you subconsciously walk by them and don't realize, like, oh, that's the diet I did in like early 2000s or whatever. And you don't realize that it like impacts you because you feel bad because you didn't follow through with it because it was probably too restrictive. But so food noise is everywhere. We
Yeah.
cannot avoid it. And that's the thing. I never say eliminate all food noise, because you'd have to go live in a cave, probably by yourself. Because we also have food noise from our friends. We love our friends and colleagues, but like people
It's
talk about,
everywhere. Yeah.
yeah. And so what you want to do is be able to recognize it, and then instead of internalizing it, realize like that works for them. Or you can be curious. I'm all for trying new things. If you really just want to add a new superfood or a supplement because it feels right, but if you're connected enough to your body, you'll know whether something is for you or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way to reduce it is to be aware of it. So I have an exercise in the book where you go through your day and you just document where the food noise is seeping in. And it's eye-opening to realize like how much exposure we all have to food noise
Yes.
on a daily basis. I mean, Instagram is like a perfect example, and
Yep.
people are well-intentioned, but if you're feeling bad about yourself and you're seeing a confident influencer talking about whatever, or showing what I eat in a day. Sorry, that those really bother me, because what I eat in a day, first of all, isn't the same every day. And second of all, it might not be what's good for what you eat in a day. And I think
Right. Yeah.
it just sends message. I could get really into it, but that is the epitome of food noise. And people are well intentioned, and I'm not going to, say they should never, but they are probably coming from a good place, like to inspire others. But it doesn't always get received in such a positive way.
Yeah. That is so true. That is
Have
so
you
true.
ever been influenced by food noise, like recently, even that it's happening?
I mean, I think it's always, honestly, I
Yeah.
think that whether it's a conversation with a girlfriend or my mom's in town and we're visiting, or my sisters were just here, and we all have food stories. And that's why I was so grateful to have you on the show, because again, I think when you're aware of them and you can talk openly about them, then you can make choices that empower you and make you feel good. And I think that's what this conversation is all about.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, food is a necessity for life, and it should make you feel good. It shouldn't make you feel like crap. And we have to rewrite the story that we're carrying around with us. So, yeah. So I feel like I'm around it all the time because of what I do and the
Right.
industries I'm in and my social media. I mean, food, the influencers, the fitness, gals on there. So it's something to be very aware of, and to know just because someone does one thing doesn't mean it's right for you. And I think that's an important part of this conversation. I had another question for you, Elise. So love this book. Look how beautiful this book is. Don't you just want to eat it? It is so beautiful. Tell me what to expect when I open it. What can I expect when I go out and buy this book?
Okay, that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked me. So, an experience is how I'm going to answer you, because the book has different components. So there's the storytelling, and then the research, and explaining food story, but there's also a bunch of prompts and exercises and worksheets so that you can actually write out your old food story and some of the thoughts and the patterns that you want to release. And it has, you don't have to be a writer. It's like almost, it's fill in the blank. So to make it as easy as possible and not something that's overwhelming, because it is already sort of overwhelming to think about all those years.
Yeah.
And then there's also recipes too, which, sometimes I feel like the recipes get lost because even though they have beautiful photos, they're in the back of the book, and there's so much in the beginning. thing, but the recipes are amazing and they're all grouped by moods. So
Love
you can
that.
start learning about that whole food mood conversation. And it was just really to give the reader a new way of thinking about food and have that narrative shift that we talked about earlier in our conversation about thinking about everything food can do for you. So, if you want to feel happy or calm or sensual, there's recipes all categorized by those.
Hello, who does not want that? It's
Yeah.
amazing. And they're so beautiful. Yes. So
Yeah.
definitely check them out. Look at, hang on. Oh my gosh. Again, it's almost time for me to eat. I mean, hello. That is so
Oh, I
beautiful.
love those. The root veggie fries.
Yes.
So
Oh my
good.
Lord. See, you don't have to deprive yourself. And I think that is all part of the conversation. All right. I'm just,
And
OMG. Look at these two. Okay. Hello.
I'm not a pancake person, but I felt like I needed to put pancakes just
What
because
is
that's
wrong
something.
with you?
I know it's just not, I guess I never really had them a lot. And so they never became like a comfort food or something. I love those pancakes. They have banana coins, like, baked or baked.
Yep. I make
They're
those
cooked.
for my family and they're a big hit. They're so delicious.
Yeah, and you have to put the chocolate on top just because, yeah,
Yeah.
chocolate.
All
So
right.
yeah, I thank you for showing those photos. I really love the recipe. So I feel like there's something for everyone, and it's not a book that you go through in one sitting and then put it, you can pick it up again and again because your food story is always evolving,
Yep.
and different chapters may speak to you at different points in your life. And so I hope that this becomes like, a reference, a resource, and a guide.
Yep. I love that. And it will be for me. I think so much of living an inspired life is realizing what you think about, realizing how you show up and who you choose to be in the world. And that's our choice that we get every single day is who we choose to be. And such a big part of that, again, is how we feel. And food is, a huge part of that. So, Elise, tell me, what does inspired living mean
Oh
to
my
you?
gosh, I was just thinking that I loved your answer. And so that's pretty hard to top that. But I think that inspired living is really being connected to who you are and your core values, and then living your life in accordance. It means that you might have to say no sometimes, even when that's hard, because, we're so many of us are people pleasers. It means listening to your body and not, and not what we talked about, being sucked in by all the food noise. And when you do that, when you eat like that, when you think, you keep your thoughts that feel, in alignment with you and who you are. Like, I just think that there's so many opportunities that open up for you, and
Yes.
they just feel good. Like you said, you start to feel really good and you feel more confident because you're not doubting it. It's who you are and who you want to be.
So
So
good. Well, thank you. Thank you for bringing awareness to my food story and helping me make different choices about how I think about food. You had a great impact. And I appreciate you sharing with the audience as well. If someone wants to buy the book, they want to connect with you, where do they go?
So the books are, and on all the online retailers, and I'm not sure about the local bookstores. You could check. Everyone loves
Local
supporting. I
bookstores,
know,
go support your local
I
bookstores.
know. And
Yes.
then my podcast is called Once Upon a Food Story, and we have to get you on that
Yes, I would
because
love that.
I know I love connecting with you. It's going to be a great conversation. And then and you can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcast. And then my website is my name, elisemuseles.com, and social media is all the same. Instagram is definitely more my baby than any of the other
And it's
channels.
so beautiful. Like your Instagram makes me happy. So, Elise Museles, go out there, get food story for yourself. Be aware of your thoughts. Be aware of how you feel. I love the food mood. Like, go get these recipes and start feeling better about what you put into
Uh,
your mouth and your mind every single day. Elise, thank you so much for
Oh
being
my
on.
gosh, Keri, thank you so much and for everything you do. And I love how you reframe things and say it, and just how you're inspiring people to live an inspired life.
Thank you so much. Appreciate
Thank
you, Elise.
you.
Can't wait till we talk again.
Me too.